I've been here about 2.5 years, and I have a background in anthropology. I've actually got a PhD in anthropology, but didn't pursue an academic career, and we moved here instead to raise our kids. And in the 2.5 years I've been working at the cemetery, I've been trying to develop, I just because of my own interests, I've been really pursuing the historical aspects of it. There's so many stories uh, in here with the people that are buried here. And looking into that, I realized that we have a lot of folks whose markers have been lost. We used temporary plaques. So we use temporary plaques when people are first buried, and if the family never places a headstone, as you know, headstones are very expensive, and out here in this area, you know, not everyone has a lot of money, and so we have a lot of older plaques that over time they get flattened to the ground so we can mow, and then the turf builds up around them, the soil comes in, and pretty soon it just looks like an open expanse of grass where somebody was buried. And so some of those plaques actually have been here over 100 years, it seems, and some of them belong to veterans who've never been recognized. So since I've been here, I've identified at least like a half a dozen folks that are buried that we didn't even know were veterans. Okay. And then some other ones that we knew are veterans, but they don't have permanent headstones. And what I decided to do is to take advantage of a program I learned about through the VA. And that program will provide a free military headstone to people who've served. And if the person's service was before 1917, anybody can request the headstone. You don't have to be a family member in order to do it. And so particularly with some of our older veterans who don't have permanent markers, it was a great opportunity to get them for them at a minimal cost to us, just of the work I've got to put into it, applying for the thing and then setting it out here. So I'm excited to say that we got our first round of headstones. You have to meet some criteria for the VA to satisfy them that this is a legitimate request. So you have to show that the person served, that it's the person that you're talking about, that they're actually in your cemetery, and you have to attest that they don't have a permanent marker. And through the first round of doing this, we got 3 markers. As it turns out, we have 3 Mexican War veterans in here. So there's one that I still want to get a headstone for, but there's 2 of them that we've got in place now, and then a Civil War veteran that we didn't even know was a Civil War vet. And we got nice upright granite markers from the VA, and I've put those in. I took the time to study the way that the VA does, that they recommend doing the headstones, and to do them to their standard, which it turns out it's a ground supported thing, which means you don't have to put a concrete base. Uh, and basically, I'm just trying to say that it's really been a satisfying process to learn about the program, to learn how to do it properly, and then honor these veterans who've lain here, in some cases, 125 years without having a proper marker that that people could come and see, that we can several times a year place out flags on. And so I'm feeling really happy about being able to do that, and it also satisfies the nerdy side of me, that I like to research things and to find out about the people who are buried here. Um, there's probably some more to add. That's kind of the gist of it. You know, one of the veterans, that one of the first ones that I discovered, you know, we use metal detectors to find the markers that show us where the graves ought to go, and we're laying out the new ones, and we're going to dig the grave. And so we have this metal detector, and I started using that early on to find these old temporary plaques that I mentioned. And one of the guys that we didn't even know was a veteran. His name was Matt Harbin, James Madison Matt Harbin. And I learned about this guy and started studying his life story, and got pretty obsessed with it, actually, like really excited to learn as much as I possibly could. So I use to find the evidence that we need for the VA, I do like I did in Harbin's case. I use a newspapers.com, a subscription newspaper site, where you can search through all kinds of old newspapers back to like the 1850s probably, and sometimes you can find published notices of pension records, for example. It's one of the forms of evidence for the VA. Or to show that they're here, we have our own records, but you can also give them an obituary that says the funeral is taking place in the Manton Cemetery to satisfy them that the person was actually buried here. So Matt Harbin, I found his plaque under like 6 inches of dirt. It had been buried there. He's in our records. So we didn't know, it's not that we didn't know these people were buried here, but some of them we didn't know they're veterans, and there's no particular place you can go and know you're at their grave in order to pay homage to them or place a flag or whatever. So I searched around for a while with that metal detector trying to find Matt Harbin's grave, and it was hard because, with that much dirt, a cheap metal detector has a hard time picking up the signal. And I finally discovered it. I uncovered the thing. Sometimes they've been in there so long that all the roots have grown around them, and the old plaques have raised lettering, and you can actually see the impressions of the letters in the roots as you pull back that layer from them. It's really, really exciting. It's like, part of my training is in archaeology, and it is a form of archaeology, historical archaeology, digging up these plaques. And this guy Harbin, and the more I researched his story, I discovered not only was he a Mexican war veteran, but he was a pretty early immigrant to California. He came out in 1844, so before the gold rush, at a time when in California there was not very many Americans. There was Native Americans, and there were Mexicans and Spanish people, but people from the East Coast of the U.S. weren't out here. He came out on one of the first parties. In fact, they were the first ones to get any wagons over the crest of the Sierra, and they pioneered the Truckee route, where they literally had to lift up their wagons at one point and haul them vertically up these granite faces in order to make it over. His party also built one of the cabins that the Donner Party stayed in their ill-fated winter in the Sierra. So a lot of historical relevance there, and a whole big story of rags to riches to rags again with this guy. The name Harbin is probably familiar, or would be familiar to some people as it was to me, because of Harbin Hot Springs in Lake County, which actually was named after this guy Harbin and his dad, who came out too. So as I was doing this research, I discovered really interesting stories, and these people that were here, before the gold rush, that fought in the Mexican War. The fellow over there is John Stilts. He was actually Matt Harbin's brother-in-law. Maybe part of the reason that Harbin ended up here at the end of his life. He came in at the very end of 1899, and he was only here 6 months, Harbin was, before his death. But his brother-in-law, John Stilts, and Harbin's sister are buried right over there, and they'd been here for a few years before that. He actually died before Harbin made it, but the fact that they're connected by marriage, that they're relatives, I think is really neat. It makes me even happier to get stones to honor them. The way I think of it is that there's a difference between a cemetery and a burying ground, and that's mainly that a cemetery, you know who's buried where, and you can honor them, and that's a really important value to us, as Americans, and as the cemetery caretaker. It's really important to me to have that focus on taking, places where we know in our records that there are people buried there, but we don't know who is there. If you walk over it, it just looks like grass. Um, Too many, people have done a great job in the cemetery. I don't mean to knock it at all, but too many of our graves have been covered over with these temporary plaques being the only thing that marks them. And so it's a small thing that I can do to help all of the people who are buried here to have that place, to have their name visible, so that, even if there's no family around, people strolling through here can see their name, and if they did, remember them at least as having been a person who lived, and is buried here now. So that's a real basic value that is important to me. And the military headstones are a way that we can do that at a minimal cost to us. We don't have to pay anything for it. We can get these very beautiful stones to honor people who are service members. But if I could, I would get a stone for everyone who's buried in here because they all deserve to have that marker. Um, that said, uh, in general, people we put a special emphasis on veterans at the cemetery. The memorial over there is dedicated to the veterans that we've got. We have about 740 burials in here, and close to 20% of those are veterans. We have about 140 vets. And as I mentioned, we 4 times a year we put out flags for them on each veteran's grave. We put wreaths in the holidays, and that's been a thing that I inherited here. There was already a real emphasis on honoring the veterans, and so doing this research and being able to get the headstones for the veterans really played into that Manton Cemetery tradition of honoring vets.
That's great. What has been like the community responses when people know about it? Because I know we received an email,
Yeah,
not even from you, from someone else who was
yeah.
just they like what you're doing.
Well, I think that maybe not that many community members are aware yet of this. It's something I've been working off and on for about a year. But the part where we actually got the approval and had the headstone sent has just been in the last few months. And I have at least a couple more that I know I can satisfy the VA according to those criteria that I mentioned, and uh, and we'll see beyond that. There are some veterans in here that I, we think they're veterans. They're designated in our records as veterans, but I haven't been able to find the records that will make that case to the VA and get them headstones. And I really, I'm going to keep working on those. But the community, I think this is one of the ways, hopefully, that people will find out about it. We did have a couple of our ladies who are really involved with the veterans, with honoring the veterans with the wreaths. Were out here recently, and they were very excited about it. I took them around and showed them the headstones, and I think they did some Facebook posts that actually probably were how some of the locals found out first about this. And those seemed to get a really good response. People seemed pretty excited about it. They were talking about some of the people who are buried here. I guess the truth is that um, one of the things that they were discussing, I'll show you this in a minute too, if we can walk around. I actually dug up an old headstone. We have these old zinc hollow cast headstones that were kind of a fad around the turn of the 20th century. We've got a good number of them here, and doing that metal detecting. In fact, I think it was during the time I was looking for Matt Harbin's headstone. We kind of strayed off of that a little bit to this other area and got a really strong signal just in this one spot. My daughter was helping me that day, and we dug down, and I thought it was a metal box, but the more I uncovered it, I finally realized there was lettering on this thing. It was a headstone, and so I don't know what happened to it, but the fellow was buried in 1899, and I think until 2024 or 23 maybe, his headstone was underground, literally under 6 inches or more of soil. And so I brought that up, and I'm gonna set that over there. And he's actually related to one of the families that's really big here in Manton, the Stones. And so I think that's part of the reason that people were excited about that. That said, the same woman who made that post also posted one showing the veterans headstones that have recently been placed. So I think people will be excited when they learn about it, and hopefully this will help.